Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new video. As you can see, I'm in a new setup. It's sort of something temporary at the moment, so the quality is a little bit iffy. So I apologise for that, but this isn't the main part of the video, so this is just me introducing what's going on now. Basically, to sum up, this is a follow-up from my vlog about the Beano and the Dandy, the one that's had quite a lot of views and a lot of people talking about it. And because of the success of that video, I actually got contacted when the Beano was revamping their app and their website and their comic and things, and I got contacted by a reporter from, I won't say where from, asking me for an interview, talking about this because I had a lot of strong opinions on the comic and what the internet has done to the British comics like the Dandy and things like that. And so basically I just did, I was going to be interviewed for that. Unfortunately, due to where I lived in Cornwall, it was very difficult for me to go and meet in person, so ultimately it ended up being me editing a version of the original video which didn't have the music, so there was no copyright risk there, and eventually it ended up being questions sent to me which I answered, so I recorded my own answers to these questions. So here we go. Here's the answers to all the questions that this reporter sent to me, and my opinions on the comic now and how it's changed since that original video and responses to that. So anyway, right, see you in a bit. Well, my history with the Beano goes as far back as 2002, when I started collecting the comics on a regular basis. I discovered the comics when I first dug out a couple old annuals I got for a couple of Christmases before, including this one here, the Beano book 1999. And from that point, at the end of the annual, it told me that there was a weekly comic, and I thought, you know what, I'd quite like to have my pocket money spent on this rather than sweets or anything, something that I could have physically, and it was kind of like a mini present every week, which was good. And really, I got it every week from that point. My nan got it to me, and since my parents spent a lot of time, at the time my mum was doing night shifts and my dad was spent a lot of time out and about at jobs, my grandparents spent a lot of time looking after me on 1 or 2 days a week, and that's just how I started getting the comics regularly, because we just went once a week, went to Nan's after school, and that's what we got, a weekly Beano, a weekly Dandy. Me and my brother spent the majority of the time from getting to my Nan's from school just reading these comics. The Beano was personally my favourite comic, and my brother's was the Dandy, but we enjoyed each other's, and when we read our ones and either eaten the free sweets that came with it or the little gifts that came with it, we swapped comics, and we from that point read each other's, and that was it, you know. It started off quite simply, but I didn't have the heart to get rid of them because there was, you know, I could just reread them, and I liked collecting things at the time. I was a fan of things like Pokemon cards, and I collected all sorts of bits and pieces that were the fad at the time, and it was just one of those things I collected, really. And I looked after my brother's collection of comics as well because he was quite young, and that's just where it began, really. I used to have the annuals every year after that point, and as a extra Christmas present, and it was always something I loved doing, because beforehand I didn't like the idea of reading. I never got into reading comics or reading books or anything like that. I couldn't read the Harry Potter books, I couldn't read anything like that because it just didn't appeal to me, and comics were a gateway almost for me to get into reading, because there wasn't a lot of reading. It was only captions and bits and pieces. I mean, to be honest, you could read the whole thing within half an hour, but it wasn't the fact, it was the fact that I was reading for fun rather than feeling like it was a chore. My first issue was actually the one I've got here, and it's the exact issue, is issue number 3130, dated July the 13th, 2002. It only cost 60 pence, compared to the prices that it is now, which, and I've kept that one from day one. I've actually had a better condition copy than that, but that one is obviously my first issue. It's got tears in the top, and it's got a bit of tape at the back where I've had to tape a part of the page back on because it fell off, whether there was a printing error or something. I remember there was an issue with the printing of this particular issue, but it seemed, yeah, so that's one of my memories with that one. My collection started off quite small, and over time it's obviously got bigger, based off how much I bought, and the weekly comic always increased it. Currently I have over 1,000 comics, varying. These include both Beanos and Dandies, as I collected every single weekly issue between mid-2002 and probably about the same mid-2010. These comics obviously have changed over the time, and over time I've went to car boot sales and jumble sales and charity shops, and I went on eBay quite a lot, and I've upped my collection by adding to it. I've bought every single annual from 1960 to the present day. I get it every year still. It's the only thing, even though I don't get the regular comic, I still get the annuals regularly. One thing I still also get, I'm on the hunt quite often here and there for rare additions to my collection. The particular one being the one here, which is issue 80 from 1940. This one is actually one I've purchased very, very recently, and I didn't intend to actually, but I wasn't actually hunting for comics. It just came up on a recommended search, and there we go. So I'm constantly adding, but I would say I would have over 1,000 individual main issues, over 100 to 200 annuals, and a variety of spin-off bits and pieces, from the fun size comics to the classics from the comics and the Beano Max and a variety of other things like that. So yeah, quite a vast collection there. I think the internet has taken away a lot of the attention towards comics. I think it's distracted kids a lot more away from it, because there's a lot more choice nowadays. I mean, you can't blame kids a lot of the time, because there is a lot more to choose from. When the Beano launched back in 1938, kids had to entertain themselves, and to have something like the Beano, which was, a specially created comic for kids, and it was within pocket money price, it was something that kids didn't really have a variety of choice from. This is not saying that the comic is in any way bad. It's the fact that kids had this comic and they enjoyed it for what it was, because that's all they'd get. That's the one thing they'd have on a regular basis. The treat. It was the treat, along with sweets and anything else kids got at the time. Over time, more forms of entertainment have shown up, and a variety of other things have shown up to compete against the comics. And now the internet is something. It's something that's pushed away other forms of media. So it's not just comics that are in trouble. TV is also in trouble, and a variety of other things. But I believe that they can coexist. I just think that there just needs to be a way to perhaps balance it a bit better. At the end of the day, the comic is one of many forms of entertainment, while before it was, I wouldn't say the only, but the most prominent form of entertainment. So it's the sense of competition, really, that the Beano has got now. And I think that is the main issue, really, because why would you want to spend money on a comic when you can get unlimited videos on YouTube, or practically every TV show under the roof on streaming sites and things like that? There's a lot more to distract kids. There's a lot more games and things like that. So at the end of the day, kids are spoiled for choice, and it just seems that there's something when you're young, as a child, you just don't want to read. It's not like it's something that you're taught as a learning thing, and something you associate with school. So a comic is something that kids would associate closer to education, and something that perhaps they're not as interested in. And I think there needs to be a way to sort of probably push the whole reading thing, because the one thing that the internet and all these other forms of media don't do is the reading element. Kids don't need to know much. Kids don't need to read to be able to understand a lot of the other mediums. While the Beano is something that obviously needs to be read, but it's something that can help you begin to read. It's obvious the industry is failing in some sort of way, as obviously the Dandy was once a beloved national treasure. It probably still is. A lot of people do consider it one of the best British comics of all time, behind the Beano. But the problem is the sales weren't something that supported that. So the Dandy was getting much more difficult to continue, because of the fact that not many people were buying it, and that's what ultimately ended the comic. That's what ended it. People weren't buying it, and perhaps it changed too much. Perhaps there was something it was doing that didn't quite grab the kids of today. The characters perhaps didn't connect as much with kids like they do in the Beano. But I think that's always been a bit of the case, if I'm honest, that the Dandy's characters, the Beano's characters are more timeless, I suppose. Dennis the Menace has always been relevant. The Bash Street Kids and Minnie are naughty children, characters that can be relevant, because kids will always misbehave. While characters like Desperate Dan and Corky the Cat are characters that were created at a certain point in time where things were a lot different. Cowboy films were a big thing when kids were reading the Dandy, when at the height of its popularity in the 50s. So I think really it was the attempts to try and reinvent itself. Maybe they went the wrong direction. I don't know, but I think in reality it tried to join it as a part of a thing, and it just didn't fit in that medium. And like I said before, entertainment is too varied for kids. So of course they're gonna choose something that's a lot more easier to digest. I think the Beano's future is going to be troubled. I will admit that. I think from the moment the Dandy went, I thought it was always a concern that the Beano would go almost as soon as, but obviously it's held on for a few years longer, and it doesn't seem to be as in danger as the Dandy was. Its sales are much better than the Dandy, and I think this relaunch that it's trying to do is in a lot of ways a good move. Because obviously it needs to adjust, it needs to adapt, and I'd much rather it survive than fade away because it went out of date. And I know I am very against the idea of it becoming just an online thing, because there is nothing better than holding a comic. There's nothing better than physically reading one of these. There's a sense of touch, there's a sense of... even the things like smelling the paper is something that you get that smell of a brand new comic, and it's something that reminded me of my childhood, a lot of things, because a comic is something you can own. A comic is something that's physical, something that you can have and you can take out and read again and again and again. Okay, you could do that with online things, but online now, everything is quick, everything is sudden, everything goes, comes and goes in an instant. And if you had stuff that was created specifically for online markets, and kids would be entertained for the moment, but it's not that lasting effects. The one thing that the Beano has had over all these years, it's always been there. It's lasted almost nearly 80 years. In a couple of years' time, it'll be 80 years old, this comic, hopefully. And it has lasted because it's got that effect. It can endure the World War. It can endure various different eras of time over the course of the last 70, 80 years. Lots of things have come to challenge it, and it's still around today. One thing about the online medium is perhaps there will be something else that comes later on, some new technology or some new thing that comes along that will replace what we've got now, what sort of internet, replace the internet or replace something else. I honestly believe that the Beano will survive and continue to thrive. But one thing I'm probably more keen on it being is the fact that it needs to be a comic. It needs to stay a comic. It can do a load of online things as well, because it's got to stay relevant. It's got to stay true to... It's basically got to try and update itself to be able to fit in with the 21st century. One other thing it can't do is get rid of the comic, because the comic is what it was. It's what it began as, and it's what it should continue to be until it finishes. Because the Dandy tried to carry on without the comic side of it. It tried to go on to being an online thing only, and it didn't survive very long on its own. So if the Beano were to go online, that's fine, but I think it needs to continue as a comic as well, because if it doesn't keep that element of something physical, something that you can keep and look after and collect, I think a lot of the core of it is gone from that if it becomes something that is just online, because that's probably what the Beano is best. This is what people remember the Beano from. They remember their collections. People remember their first issue. They've probably got a lot of people remember that time they went down to the newsagents to buy their first Beano or whatever it is. There's an element of joy in that. And I think that's incredibly important, and I think the Beano shouldn't lose that, and I hope it doesn't. I think kids are still very much interested in this. It is something the kids, if you stick them in front of a comic, they'll read it. I have a young brother who is part of that target demographic, and I look at him and I can see that he would enjoy the Beano and Dandy. I've actually sat him down and got him to read them, and he's read them. He enjoys the Dennis the Menace cartoon, and he enjoys the characters, the creations that the comic is. And if told to watch and read the Beano, if he reads the comic, he will read it cover to cover and would have no problem with it. I think the issue is that if they don't have access to it, they quickly forget about it. That's why things online have become more popular, because kids can access it straight away. With a comic, you've got to either have a subscription or you've got to go down to the newsagents to get it. And nowadays, if something that's available straight from your own home, then I think kids prefer that. Also, if they don't live in a place where they can easily access this sort of thing, like where I live, in a small village away from any sort of shop, they're less enticed to get whatever it is. But if you stick them in front of a comic, they will read it. If you show them that comics are a thing to have, they will read them. And that's one thing that hasn't gone from kids nowadays. It's just the fact that they've just not got access to it anymore. The new Beano relaunch is exciting. Honestly, I'm quite excited that something like this is happening, because it's something new and it's something fantastic and it's great. Because despite the fact that a lot of people didn't like the way the Dandy updated, I always found it very exciting when you see something new, something fresh and something exciting, especially from a brand new Enjoy. I think it would be incredibly different if the comic is something that that discontinues and the online is something that does continue. It will be different. There will be a lot of things that won't be the same, because you won't get that. There's a lot of things you just can't explain about comics. I think one thing is the fact of holding these. When kids used to read them, they used to just pick them up. It's kids sat in a chair reading a comic that they enjoy in their own pace and time. There's no sort of glowing screen, no sort of connection or anything to stop them reading it. With being online, there is always the possibility to lose internet connection. There's always the possibility to have a power cut. There's always a possibility of your computer to die, or technology has flaws. If technology fails in any sort of way, it prevents you from enjoying that said entertainment. A comic, you sit down and you can read it from start to finish, there'll be no problems. It's something that you only get with a physical comic, and there was always that excitement of it, because also it's something that does. I think kids and a lot of people nowadays, including myself, I put myself in this box, spend a lot of time on computers. It's part of our lives now. It's part of our jobs, and it's part of society. And I think it runs society now. And in a lot of ways that's good, but in a lot of ways it's bad. But I think it needs to have a good balance. And I think having something like a comic, picking it up, stepping away from the wider world and reading it for half an hour. That's all it takes to read one of those, half an hour of your time. And it's probably a better experience away from anything that the wide, busy world. It's an escapism, and it's something that, even with the internet, you can't quite escape the world that's around. And kids like that. Kids like to escape. Kids like to read books that make them imagine fantasy worlds. That's why things like Harry Potter are so popular. People like that sense of escapism, and I think having something that you can read away from all the stresses of reality and all the things of the world, and escapes to what is essentially just paper with drawings on it. But I consider the Beano an incredibly important part of my childhood. So much so, more than anything else. It's the only thing that's sort of stuck with me over these years. I've liked and disliked things on and off for as long as I can remember. The one thing that's always been consistent is that comic. Whether I've been reading it regularly on a weekly basis as a kid, or just occasionally picking up an issue off eBay or at a car boot sale, or anything else. And it's something that stuck with me, and it's something that I hope sticks with me for the rest of my life, because it was important. It was important. An end.